Bonjour, bienvenue tout le monde à Alimenter la réflexion, l'événement mensuel à l'Institut de recherche de la science, la société et les politiques publiques à l'Université d'Ottawa. Je suis Marisa Beck, directrice de recherche de l'Institut. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to today's Food for Thought event, the monthly talk series here at the ISSP, where Institute members present and discuss their latest research on burning questions at the interface of science, society, and policy. I would like to open today's event with the University of Ottawa's Indigenous affirmation, and I encourage you to acknowledge the land from where you are joining us today as well. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. The ISSP is about to publish its strategic plan for the next 5 years, which defines the Institute's strategic vision as to help Canada transform decision-making to address the grand challenges of our time. And today's Food for Thought talk actually speaks beautifully to that vision, namely the transformation of global food systems towards greater sustainability. And that is certainly one of the grand challenges of our time. And I'm very excited to introduce today's speakers. Presenting today will be Chibuke Gennegue, faculty affiliate of the ISSP and full professor in the School of Nutrition Sciences here at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. And I will be handing over moderating duties in just a moment to Kelly Bronson, who's a core member of the ISSP and Canada Research Chair in Science and Society here at the ISSP, as well as an assistant professor at the School of Sociological and Anthropological Studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences. Kelly has been working extensively on questions around innovation in agriculture and climate change, and she's particularly interested in science-society tensions that sometimes come up around controversial innovations and technologies in these areas. Thank you all for joining us today, and over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Marisa, and welcome everyone. And thanks for inviting me to moderate this, I'm sure will be a really interesting session. So I wanted to switch gears and just introduce Professor Chibuke Gennegue, who is, as Marisa said, a full professor in the School of Nutrition Sciences in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa, and is one of those people who seems to be good at everything, good at lab bench science and the sciences, but also thinks across the science society boundary. So is a researcher, is a university research chair in food properties and nutrient bioavailability, who thinks, it seems to me, from a kind of social determinants of health perspective. He has joined the leadership committee of the first research center dedicated to studying the biological, social, cultural, and economic determinants of health in Canada's Black communities. So he serves many important roles at the university and beyond, and it's our pleasure to hear from him today. Take it away, Professor Gennegue.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly, for that kind introduction. Welcome everybody to today's presentation on my perspectives on the role of food science, technology, and innovation in food systems sustainability globally. So today I would offer a lot of perspectives, but also interface them with some of the ongoing discussions in the food systems area. As we all know, food is essential to humankind. There is a very strong need of food for survival as we derive our nutritional components of the nutrients of the diet through food. But in addition to that, food is also an integral part of cultural identity in any society. So we cannot do without food. We eat food to socialize. We eat food for different purposes. So that makes this topic very important. The food system is complex, and it's because it has multiple elements. So from farm to fork. So you look at food systems from production perspective, but also from processing, distribution, and consumption perspectives. And if you look at all those elements, you see that there is a very multidisciplinary approach to food systems. So it cuts across many disciplines, from natural sciences and engineering to social sciences and humanities, and certainly also to health sciences. I am a member of a faculty of health sciences, and much of what we do in the School of Nutrition Sciences is in the area of food systems, looking at it from a nutritional point of view. Right now, because of the food system complexity, it is often the case that a concerted effort is required to maintain the food system, because it's not one discipline approach. Multiple disciplines need to come together to work together to have a more sustainable food system. So bringing me to the next point. So right now, the global food system is not efficient. So it's thought to be unsustainable. And this is because of multiple reasons. And the primary reason is that hunger is still on the rise. Over the past decades, 2 decades, there has been some interesting efforts made, towards reducing hunger. But unfortunately, in the last 2 years, some of those efforts have been jeopardized by particularly by the pandemic, but also by other issues happening across the world. So right now, there is still an increase in the number of people affected by hunger. I think about 1 in 9 people are affected by hunger. Secondly, the food systems currently does not prevent malnutrition. In fact, some would say that it negatively affects nutrition and health outcomes. And you can look at it from 2 perspectives. One is undernutrition, where you have lack of sufficient nutrients in diet. So in that case, it could be that food is not available, but in some cases the food is available, but still is nutritionally deficient. The second case is overnutrition, and this is very much seen in more developed economies, where you have obesity and other health issues related to unhealthy diets. And this is also currently on the rise. So if you take these 2 points of view, you could see that the food systems currently is not helping in maintaining a balanced nutrition and health outcomes in the world. And then lastly, the food system also affects the environment negatively. In fact, it is estimated that about 30% of the global greenhouse gas emissions is related to food systems activities. And we could definitely do better than this. So if you add all this together, and also considering the fact that the food system is not sufficiently resilient, you would agree that the food system is currently not sustainable. In terms of resilience, much of the things happening in the past year would provide evidence that disruptions in war and political conflicts, emerging war and political conflicts, or pandemic or natural hazards, but also sometimes mismanagement could lead to disruptions in the food systems, and that could exacerbate the current statistics on hunger. And because of that, a way forward has been recently proposed. So about 18 months ago, UN Secretary General convened a food systems summit, which happened last month, just about 1 month ago. And the goal of this summit was to bring all stakeholders together to work collaboratively to make tangible, positive changes to the world's food systems. And to do that, there were 5 defined action tracks. And these action tracks, we put them together. The goal was to achieve all food systems related goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly Goal 2, which is focused on zero hunger with its specific objectives, but also how this goal is interfaced with some other goals like SDG 3, which is focused on good health and well-being, and 10 on reduced inequalities, 12 on responsible production and consumption, and then 13 on climate action. In order to achieve these, part of the UN Food Systems Summit, in fact, a significant part of it was the development of an independent scientific group because the goal was to make sure that there is a very strong science evidence supporting the summit. And this scientific group, independent of the Food System Summit, worked to provide input based on scientific evidence, input from the global scientific community. Lots of activities were held in order to drive those inputs, especially the science days, but also over 40 side events that happened during that period. I was fortunate to participate in one of the side events organized by the Inter-Academic Partnership, where the regional networks of academies around the world provided regional perspectives in how food systems technology and innovation could be directed towards attaining sustainable food systems. And some of the discussions that happened during that meeting, as a discussant, my perspective as a discussant, I will share some of them today, in addition to my response to some of the points that were made, recommendations that were made by the science group, the scientific group of the Food System Summit. So at the end of the summit, the knowledge base generated was used to make 7 major priorities for innovation. And these priorities cut across different disciplines, and they were quite broad. They were called innovations, but if you look into them, you would see that these are ideas that have been floating around for some time, but it's quite good that these activities were able to provide a very clearly defined points on the focus for the future in order to achieve sustainable food systems. Of course, one thing with such activities is that we have a lot of recommendations, but sometimes implementation becomes an issue. So it's quite important that some of these priorities be focused on by all stakeholders in order to achieve the goals and be able to actually have a measurable impact on the food system in the short and the long term. So for the rest of the talk, I will focus more on scientific evidence from the perspective of food science, technology, and innovation, because I had already mentioned the food system is quite diverse. I am a food scientist, and much of my activity is focused on post-harvest handling of food and also enhancement of nutritional benefits and health benefits. So I'll look at the strong scientific evidence present in that area of food systems to support the application of these innovations in transforming food systems. Now, as we know, food science and technology has led to a very excellent set of technologies which are currently applied in transformation of food. And some of the benefits, and there are many, some of the benefits of these technologies that we have been able to achieve better preservation of nutrients in food. We have also been able to enhance sensory attributes that makes food palatable and desirable, thereby increasing consumer acceptability. We've also been able to ensure safety because some of the issues in the food systems is with respect to safety. So through these technologies and processing technologies, we have enhanced the food safety and also attained the shelf stability of food products. And in addition to fortification, so in some parts of the world, fortification is needed to meet specific nutritional needs. So these are existing innovations, and they have been proven very beneficial in the food systems. But I will focus on other ideas, that could enhance some of the outputs and be able to lead us to a better outcome in the short term, but also in the long term. And these perspectives, I'll group them into 2. So the first one, it would be focused on efficient use of resources. Globally, we produce enough food. That is the suggestion, that we produce enough food. But the problem is that much of what we produce is wasted. And this could be in form of post-harvest losses, but also it could be in the processing, retail, and consumer levels because of our activities. So because of this, there is a need to promote circular food systems so that we can bring back some of this waste back into the food system. So upcycling of food waste and byproducts is a very important approach that could be explored towards achieving sustainable food systems. And this could be in the form of using emerging processing technologies in food science and technology to add value to products, bring them back and create promote niche markets for those upcycled products. So that way we'll be able to recycle or upcycle some of these highly valuable nutrients that we're currently wasting. The second approach is on food diversification. This is a largely untapped resource. If you look currently, we consume just quite a limited selection of food. And there are many potentially solid and high nutrient dense food that are not currently in the food systems. And this includes neglected and underutilized crops. There's so many species of crops that are edible that we're not currently consuming. So there is a need to domesticate some of these crops and bring them back into the food system. So there is research, solid scientific evidence available that some of these crops have a very high nutritional quality, and some of them are sustainable in terms of their production. So they need to be reintroduced into the food system in order to provide that diversity that we need to maintain stability. But also there is also the example of alternative sources of food, which is becoming more, attracting the attention even of consumers. So these alternative sources could range from plant, animal, or marine-based sources of food that we can use to, supplement some of the already existing sources of, for instance, proteins. And this can range from, say, marine organisms like microalgae, but also on edible insects and some other culturally acceptable forms of food that we're not currently consuming. And also, from this perspective of food diversification, we will see that when we try to expand the options, so we are reducing overuse of a limited selection of food resources. But we're also indirectly encouraging local food production, because then you would see more involvement of local actors in producing all the diverse foods that we could consume. And that would reduce importation of food and all the effects that it could have on the environment, but also help in stabilizing the local food system, making it more resilient, especially with respect to the global disruptions when we have more options available locally. Currently, there are advances in food science and technology that could help achieve food diversification. In fact, some of them have actually enabled us to understand more properly the composition of the food, the safety, to make sure that there are no allergenicity or toxicity associated with the components of food, but also to enable us to process them into palatable, value-added products for the consumer. And the last of the perspective is related to the health promoting properties of food. And this is interfaced with SDG 3, which is focused on good health and well-being. Traditionally or historically, we consume food to derive nutrients, but over the past 2 decades, there is strong evidence that food can be used as a preventative approach to health. Because some components of food that we call bioactive compounds in functional foods and nutraceuticals can be used to prevent diet-related health issues like overnutrition and related diseases like obesity and diabetes. So this is a very critical component of the food systems that is yet to be untapped because much of the focus has been on production agriculture. But increasingly, we are understanding that we should also enhance other benefits of food that could also help in achieving some of the sustainable development goals. And this is one key aspect of that discussion. And to achieve this, we need to apply some of the sustainable processes that we've developed within the food science and technology sector. And that could range from nature-based processing, like fermentation and germination, but also emerging technologies, that could help sustainably produce some of these health outcomes in the process of food consumption by the public. So these are all positive directions that could be used to add value to the food systems, thereby attaining sustainability. But there are very important gaps that need to be closed before we can achieve these goals for better outcomes. First is that we need to focus on locally driven solutions. Right now, the science policy initiatives happen mostly at the global level. For instance, the high-level panel of experts on nutrition and food security. And these are global initiatives that help, to enhance the discussions of making changes in the food systems. But if you look at it, majority of the actors are not present at this level. In fact, the holders of knowledge are often not involved. So that the community that is affected sometimes is often not involved. So there needs to be a bottom-up approach. In addition to the high-level panels, there needs to be a bottom-up approach to policy making, and that would help to facilitate engagement at the community level, but also bring in some new knowledge that are not currently existing at the mainstream scientific community. And indirectly, this could also help to build trust in science within the public, because right now there is, with the disconnect and misinformation, it's often the case that the public would not engage or trust the outcomes of scientific discoveries. So having a locally driven approach could help attain some of these outcomes. The second one is about collaboration, not just between different disciplines or across different disciplines, but also across different sectors. As food scientists and technologists, we have been working with the industry for a very long time. We have been working with the government, and we've been working with different stakeholders in providing solutions to food-related challenges. But this needs to happen more, especially across different disciplines. So not just merely having social scientists and natural scientists and engineers as part of a research grant, for instance, but also but most importantly, having a true integration of the expertise from across the different disciplines in addressing one common goal. All right, so we don't look at the problem from just our disciplinary perspective, but we focus on the goal and then see how our disciplinary perspectives could help meet those common goals. So that is quite important. And this can cut across the different sectors in academia, from environmental to social to economic sectors, but also between private and public sectors, and at the national, local, and international levels. So with this, there will be more of an integrated and concerted effort to help look at all the dimensions of the food systems and be able to hopefully achieve sustainability. And the next point is the focus. So a lot of emerging food science technology innovations are mostly industry driven. And of course, with industry, there is always the need to make profit, which is not a problem for the economy, but also sometimes you see that there's a missing link because there's no direct consumer benefit. So there needs to be an enhanced consumer focus, a public focus in food science technology innovation. So when we develop these innovations, it's not just about the industry using them to transport food and put them on the grocery stores, and then we purchase the food. Sometimes it's not affordable. So there has to be innovations that the consumer could implement on their own when they're processing food at the domestic level, thereby deriving benefits directly, affordable benefits as well. Another way of focusing on the consumer is public engagement, such as this meeting. And that we need to have more of these discussions. So that way we can have enhanced interactions with the consumer. And particularly the benefit of this enhanced interaction is to reduce public misinformation. Because there is a lot of scientific advances in food systems and food system technology and innovation. But sometimes some of these advances are not properly presented to public, and that leads to misinformation and distrust in the public. So that needs to be enhanced in order to bridge that gap and have the public trust us as scientists, knowing fully well that we are also part of the consumers. And whatever scientists are looking forward to discovering in order to help promote the food systems is for the public good. So I have 3 more points on what I have identified as the gaps, and then I'll wrap up after that. So the next one, and which is also one of the main focuses of the Food System Summit, is that we have not tapped into the traditional and local knowledge available on the food systems. Food systems and technology, food science and technology innovations application depend a lot. If you want to successfully apply it in a society, it depends a lot on environmental factors, but also economic, religious, and social-cultural factors. The society is driven by these factors, and if we don't, tap into some of these existing information within the society, it will be very difficult to implement a foreign technology, for instance, or foreign innovation. So traditional knowledge remains largely missing in scientific literature. The activities of the scientific groups of the Food System Summit are largely based on published literature, but also consultation with different stakeholders. But if you look at it in general, it often lacks that local traditional knowledge. This has to be enhanced, especially knowledge from indigenous peoples across the world. Needs to be highlighted more in the scientific literature, and to see how some of this knowledge could drive innovation in food systems. And part of this is that there is not enough inclusivity in data gathering. So currently our data gathering approach is one-sided. So we focus a lot on scientists to gather knowledge, and we need to expand this a little bit more. Because a lot of information available that could help reach some of these goals may be available outside the scientific community. And that can take a form of, for instance, citizen science. So where we have more of a call for ideas or a call for solutions, crowdsourced solutions that could help us achieve some of these goals. In addition to inclusivity in data gathering, that we also need to have a more inclusive data sharing approach. In the scientific community currently, our primary data sharing medium is the journals, but also conferences and proceedings. But increasingly, public engagement and stakeholder engagement. But if you look at journals, for instance, there is this attraction for newness. That sometimes when you try to publish a creative solution, but maybe it's very common, you have a lot of people reject those ideas, telling you that we already know about this. So it has to be enhanced, because sometimes the solutions to these problems do not need to be complicated. Sometimes they are things that we already know that we haven't haven't applied them correctly in answering some of these questions. So we need to be more inclusive of data coming from different parts of the world, no matter how common, but also focusing a lot on regional data, data of regional importance. I remember a few journalists would tell you that if your work is not of global importance, then it's not going to be acceptable for publication, and that has to change, because the global effects we see in the food systems is not just at the global level. It's the little regional effects that culminate into the global challenges that we have today. So crops and foods and processes and technologies of regional importance, in fact, to me, is the most important discoveries that we have to make in order to quickly achieve that global beneficial effect on the food systems. Now, the next one, before the last point, is human capacity building. Because now we have emerging aspects of food systems, and so with that, there are emerging opportunities. So we need to build a very strong human capacity to support these emerging opportunities. So food scientists with expertise in policy, in information and communication technology, in history, are increasingly needed. And right now we don't have enough because the food system, now we have identified the multiple dimensions. So we need people with these expertise, multiple expertise. For instance, information and communication technology experts is needed in digitization in agriculture and the food systems. Particularly now in the food system, from my perspective, we need people that could implement food informatics or the use of big data in enhancing traceability of food, for instance, but also in ensuring safety and efficiency. Because right now we have a lot of information in the literature, but we need to be able to channel all this information and build models that could help us predict the future, that could help us optimize our processes, enhance efficiency, and hopefully have a positive impact on the food systems. Also, people with science policy expertise at the science policy interface are also very well desirable at the moment, and that is one of the goals of the ISSP in bridging that gap between science, society, and policy. So I'm also very happy to see that we have in-house a master's program within the ISSP that enable people to obtain their master's degree in their respective home departments, but also have a policy component integrated within that master's program. So that is a very positive direction that I feel should be expanded across different other disciplines to have that very well-fitted interface with the food systems, thereby providing us with these multi-talented human capacities that we need to address the challenges. And the last point, and perhaps everybody would expect this, is that we have a lot of discussions, but sometimes there is a lack of political will to implement some of these initiatives. So we need a very strong political will, both at the international, national, and regional levels, to support these initiatives, but particularly to invest financially to drive food systems science. All right, so there are budget cuts in a lot of places, especially against scientific activities. This has to be reverted. This needs to be reverted so that way we'll have more public and private sector investment. And the public sector investment is really important because there it will drive innovation, not just those that will benefit the production industry, but also the ones that will directly influence that would directly have a public benefit, direct benefit to the consumer. In fact, one of the recommendations of the UN Food System Summit Scientific Group is that governments should spend at least 1% of the food system's GDP on food system science. And that is fair enough, or at least 1%, and maybe increasingly more in the future. Because the food system generates a lot of GDP for different economies in the world, but still there is insufficient funding, for the food systems. So that can be a very good recommendation. I think that's a very good recommendation, a fair recommendation that needs to be implemented in order to facilitate some of these engagements. So these points are not exhaustive, but there are some of the major issues that I have identified from my engagement over the last 2 years on these discussions. And to finalize the points, I always feel that there is a need for a regular review and update in order to ensure that the programs are still relevant and that our approach to the solutions are also still feasible and relevant. So with that, we can have updates in order to have a more efficient system. So thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to the questions and discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent, and it gave us a lot of food to chew on, a lot of food for thought. I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now, and I'm just going to take that opportunity to start us off if that's okay. I have a question for you. I really appreciated, perhaps I have several, but one of the things I really appreciated in the discussion was that you gave us solutions, not just problems. And I really like some of these sort of technical solutions, presumably ones that you work on that you mentioned, the need for kind of circular economy or systems to recuperate some of the waste in the food system, novel edibles, right? Focusing on foods with kind of mega nutrition capability. But, I'm kind of wondering, you said at the beginning, and I totally, as someone who studies the food system and has a background in the sciences, but is currently a social scientist. I got drawn to the food system, to working on food system issues or problems because of their interdisciplinarity. And you said at the very beginning, right? Food system issues are intensely interdisciplinary. And I'm thinking about how the solutions are the same, right? These technical solutions don't exist in a vacuum. So here's my question. I'm just thinking about these novel edibles, right? If we're thinking about insect-based proteins or getting people in Canada to not waste the 14% of household waste we know, right? Average family food waste in Canada, the kind of social learning that will be required for these technical solutions to work, not just among consumers, but I guess I'm also thinking about corporations. I'm thinking about that big protest at the UN Food Summit where a bunch of peasant groups, right, walked out because they said, look, at a lot of solutions that are proposed by the UN are not addressing the root of the problem, which is the corporate food system and this kind of growth imperative. So my question is this: are there maybe some of, what kind of social learning do you see that might be required on the part of consumers, on the part maybe of private sector? And you mentioned some policy changes that need to happen, but, can you talk about that and maybe give us some success stories, or if you have any from your own work?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That's a good question. And that's also a very challenging question. You rightly mentioned that for the Food System Summit, there were quite a number of oppositions. In fact, a few actors withdrew, from the process because they thought that it wasn't very efficient or properly representative of different disciplines. And so for every initiative, there has to be such challenges and naturally you don't expect to have one solution emerge or the ultimate solution emerge just from one engagement. So if you look at that from that perspective, you would know that this is an ongoing dialogue, and it's also an ongoing ongoing effort trying to educate both the public and the industry and government on the need to continue to make these changes. We were all born with food as part of our culture. And so that, once you grow up with something, it's difficult sometimes in adulthood to change what you're very familiar with without knowledge of the greater implication of our activities. It's difficult to change our attitude. So that's why I mentioned that public engagement is quite important, not just in telling them what we have discovered, but also in involving them in the process. When we involve the consumer in the process of a scientific discovery in food systems technology and innovation, then they begin to see how they are also an integral part of that system, and how we, the scientists, are also the public because we consume food. It's also our health. So it's not mutually exclusive. We're all part of that interconnected system. With that knowledge, then you begin to see clearly, how our activities influence the food system, how that food that, is turned brown a little bit and we tossed it in the garbage, contributes to that sustainability, how we can also use technologies in the scientific literature to transform it ourselves by making different other products that we can consume at the household level. So you can see little ways that as a consumer, you could start changing your lifestyle and attitude and approach towards food that would then culminate into a bigger effect, at the regional and global level. So it needs policy changes. And of course, a number of countries are trying to institute that. A lot of approaches now are being undertaken in order to recycle food. So you have the ugly fruits and vegetables, in Europe and in Canada and some parts of the world. So these are all very good steps in the right direction, but it needs to be expanded. It needs to be bigger than that in order to have that meaningful change. But of course, every little step counts, every little step matters. So these are some of the examples I have seen in terms of what we need to do. So like I said, there is no one size fits all approach, but it's all our little activities and engagements that would eventually make up that big change, a transformative change that we want in the future.
Like that. So ongoing education, public education, and involving consumers in the science. In the innovation early on or upstream. Right. So we have some questions now for you. One person in the Q&A says, nice presentation. You captured all the elements that are currently affecting the food economy. So many potential actions. If you were to draw on an action plan for Canada, which actions would you prioritize? I'm not sure whether they mean the Canada's food policy now, or maybe just your own action plan for Canada, but I'll let you interpret.
Okay, so that's also a very complex scenario because, like we said, food systems is complex. So if I draw an action plan, it will be from a disciplinary point of view because of my expertise. I don't understand all the social dimensions, economic dimensions, and the political dimensions involved. And that is why I need collaborators in these sectors. That is why we need people to work together. But from my food scientist perspective, our food science perspective, that we have to do more in implementing or maybe implementing the traditional systems, the indigenous systems of food and agriculture. Because right now, these represent some of the untapped innovations currently in Canada. So with that, proper collaboration with indigenous people in deciphering the food system, the traditional food system, and then knowing some of the strong innovations currently existing and trying to upscale some of those technologies at the national level might help provide some solutions, especially with respect to efficient use of resources and sustainable processing of food. So like I said earlier, it will be very difficult for one person from one expertise to be able to answer that question and make an action plan for an entire country as Canada. But certainly, it's a dialogue that can be had where, some of these disciplinary action plans could be brought together to achieve that national action plan. So like you already mentioned about, national policy, for food, these are all the discussions that are needed in order to be able to achieve those goals.
Excellent. Okay, the next question is, how has COVID made inefficiencies in the global food system worse or more visible?
Okay, so COVID certainly made the inefficiencies worse, but it also made it more visible. So it's a pro and a con. Because we already know for decades that we have issues with the food systems. We already know about malnutrition for a very long time, and also overnutrition and all the issues related to poor diets. But right now, because of COVID, the situation got worse. Before COVID, it was about 1 in 9 people that suffer from hunger, but now it's more than that. I added almost 1 million, almost 1 million, I think. I don't remember the exact number to that statistics. So COVID affected the food system. We all saw the disruptions in respect to food production, shortages in human resources, in people working on farm and in the food processing sector, but also on food transportation. For that initial phase of the pandemic, there were massive disruptions with a movement of food across borders, and that definitely increased price of food and made a lot of things. But right now, currently, we're still recovering from that in a big jump in food price. But like you said in that question, that has also made all these issues more visible. It's quite unfortunate that it had to get worse to become more visible. I would expect that we'll just leave it where it was and try to now make it more visible and then try to get solutions to the problem. But it had to get worse to become more visible. So because it has, we need to take advantage of that visibility. And so the Food System Summit came about the right time because without visibility, it brought about many actors. The industry was genuinely involved, so it wasn't about making profits. It was just about genuinely contributing towards attaining a sustainable solution, because in the end, it benefits everybody, because then it would increase efficiency and resource utilization by the industry, which would bring down the cost of food production. And then it would benefit the consumer because we pay less for food, and then we get food available, high quality, nutritious food available. So the pandemic is one of the many other factors that have recently impacted the food system, but it's definitely one of the biggest impact for that short period of time.
Excellent, thank you. Someone has written, thanks for the expository and encompassing talk. I'm particularly glad that you mentioned that food solutions should be more geographical based. Double burden of malnutrition is a problem, particularly in Africa, and I would love to ask for your view on how this could be better tackled. Secondly, maybe we'll ask one question at a time. Are you okay if I ask both now? Or?
You can ask both, yes.
Okay, so social media has been a way by which consumers are being misinformed and confused about food choices. How could this be tackled from a scientist perspective?
These are very good questions. The first question is about the double burden, and that's a very big issue pre-pandemic, at least for a decade or more now, where you have both undernutrition and overnutrition occurring in the same community. And it's just mostly because, in that community have this very big disparity in income. So you see people who can't afford food and people who can afford a lot of food, but still very unhealthy choices. And that tends to, shift towards extreme undernutrition to extreme overnutrition with obesity and diabetes and all the other complications. So even before the pandemic, there has been this call to focus more on nutrition-sensitive agriculture. Where we focus more, instead of more on yield, we focus more on the nutrient density of each kilogram or each pound of food produced. So that way, when people consume the little available food, we're sure that they're able to get sufficient nutrients and of the highest quality as well. So that is one approach that needs to be focused, but also institutional and maybe international policies, restricting the industry from producing certain types of food and also making them enhance the production of another type of higher quality food. Because I believe that much of the overnutrition that we have is because of processed food that were processed and sold. Processed food is good, but those are processed in a way that it strips them all the high quality nutrients, and then we're left with empty calories. So these we have to downgrade some of these activities and enhance more the activities that will lead to higher quality products. So I think with that, we'll be able to hopefully achieve a balance and maybe in the long run, eliminate this double burden and achieve a healthier, nutritionally healthier populations around the world. The second question is about misinformation, especially by in social media, and that is one of the biggest issues because compared to the traditional media, social media is unregulated in a way because people can share different ideas and through that process generate a massive followership. And in terms of science, technology, and innovation, and particularly in the food area, a lot of those are misinformation. And it gets the consumer panicking about, what we do as scientists. So to bridge that gap and maybe have a better system, I would recommend that some of us scientists need to focus on science communication as a way to also be active participants in that discussion on social media. So I believe with this, we could enhance our communication skills and find better ways to distill some of the complex solutions that we recommend in scientific literatures and make it more presentable to the lay person in a way that they can absorb this information. So instead of shouting against people who are propagating this misinformation, I think we should jump in and start providing very strong scientific evidence to refute a lot of those misinformation and provide clearer information to the public about what we're doing and how we are solving the problems of the food systems, and then also how they can become a part of that engagement.
I really loved your response about the need for regulatory policy around the sale of high fat, high sugar, highly processed foods. In food studies, people sometimes call them pseudo foods. And actually, when I teach students in the sociology of food, I get them to do a worksheet where they go around the grocery store and they look at how many places in the grocery store and at what level of the grocery store aisle those pseudo foods are placed, right? We all know you have to walk through the gauntlet of candy and pop to get through to the cash. And that's because it currently makes the food industry a lot of money. So I'm totally on board with that suggestion or that point. We have a really interesting question in the chat. Thank you so much for your talk. The person says, if journals are often less receptive to new and edgy research ideas around food systems, I was wondering if there are outlets that are worth exploring for getting research across for food systems that have more impact.
That's a good question. And in fact, there are many other outlets. Social media is one of them. And people have often shared their scientific discoveries in the social media and as blogs and other forms of communication systems that are not hindered by the peer review system. The journal peer review system is very well needed in order to make sure that we are following acceptable scientific practices in communicating our work, but also in conducting the work. But at the same time, it also restricts the publishing of new ideas because editors are experts, but also we have limited knowledge as human beings. We don't know everything. So sometimes those instances would impede the publishing of something that could very well become a creative solution. So I would say that there are many other ways that are not peer-reviewed, like we could share the science, but the problem is that the reward system that we have currently, especially in academia, traditionally does not acknowledge these other avenues, and that makes it problematic. So if we have institutional changes in universities and research centers or research institutes where people are rewarded for everything, both the peer-reviewed science, but also the non-peer-reviewed science that have very strong merit, then you see that our activities will begin to change. I personally would publish, anywhere, peer-reviewed or not, if those contributions are going to be acknowledged by my employer, for instance. In some disciplines, these are acknowledged. I know some maybe social science disciplines that accept, blogs and Twitter threads as part of the package, scientific contribution package, but it's certainly not all disciplines. Some people are still very traditional, and if it is not peer reviewed, in fact, even when it's peer reviewed and it's not a high impact journal, they will still oppose it. So that practice has to change in order to have people then encouraged to share their work in all the other places. And so it needs policy change for sure at the academic level. That would hopefully drive the attitude towards a more open system of sharing.
Assuming, this is just an assumption, but this person might be an HQP, and for reasons of early careerness and vulnerability, they might need to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. Is there one you could name that you think is more receptive to this cutting edge work? Just as a tip to that person?
There are some. I can't maybe possibly name one right now, but they can contact me and then I can share. So I belong to the editorial boards of journals as well, but there are journals that are more receptive of both positive and negative results. Some of them allow you to publish preprint even while the peer review is ongoing. So that way you can get comments from the public directly on your paper, even before peer review. So those open systems are, in my opinion, preferable, because then that way you can have that engagement with the public, you can share it on social media. And a lot of journals now are sharing their published papers on social media, which is positive, which is good. Most of the issue is with the peer review system, in my opinion. So with the open system of publishing before peer review as preprints, I think it encourages engagement, with the public, with the scientific community, irrespective of what the reviewers think. And then maybe afterwards, then there could be, that additional benefit of peer review. But I feel that there are many places you could do it without mentioning any specific one. But there are existing journals that support this type of system.
Thank you. Just as a plug, the Canadian Journal for Food Studies it's not the highest impact journal because it's quite a national audience, but it's very open to innovative, maybe not science, but more social science work in this area. We have one last question. I think we have time. Do you think moving away from our current system of meat production is likelier to come from social change and moral suasion, technological breakthroughs, policy changes, or a mix of all of the above?
I think it's a mix of everything. Like I say, there's no one size fits all approach. There needs to be a social change for sure, a moral suasion, like you rightly mentioned. And it's not necessarily moving away, but it's about creating a balance. Our food system needs to be balanced. We need the animal-based system, we need the plant-based system. We also need other alternative sources like the marine sources. So we just have to create a balance to make the food systems sustainable. So a little tilt towards the more sustainable options, but also keeping the other option, because the consumer has some consumers need a variety of food sources, and scientifically, these varieties are also important. There are certain benefits we derive from animal-based foods, for instance, increased digestibility and nutrient release compared to the more highly structured plant-based food. But it's often said that the plant-based food system is more sustainable than the animal-based food system. So if you can juggle things a little bit to create a balance between the two, from all these suggestions you've made, social change, moral suasion, technological breakthroughs from our perspective as scientists, but also policies that would drive particularly the industry in changing their production systems and their focus to more sustainable options, which is currently happening, but needs to be increased in order to quickly achieve some of these goals. Then that would definitely, a concerted approach, with all these suggestions would definitely help us towards getting to the goal faster.
Thank you so much. This has been just excellent. So I'm sure everyone is clapping for you, and I'm going to hand the floor back to the research director at ISSP, Marisa Beck.
Thank you.
Wow, what a fascinating conversation. I could have listened to this conversation much longer, but we are running out of time. So it is now my pleasure to thank our outstanding speakers today, Chibuike Odenigwe and Kelly Bronson, for this excellent presentation and discussion. I would also like to thank the team here at the ISSP for making this event possible. In particular, my colleagues Brendan Frank for event planning and Raphael Desodi for the flawless technological implementation today. Finally, thank you all for joining us today. If you would like to revisit or share today's discussion, you can access the recording of today's webinar through our YouTube channel, and you'll find the link on the ISSP website and on our social media channels. Usually at this point, I announce the next Food for Thought event in the next month, but there will actually not be a Food for Thought event in November. Instead, we are looking forward to maybe seeing you at the Canadian Science Policy Conference that will take place in late November, virtually as well. And there, a number of ISSP members will be represented in multiple panels on topics such as mission-driven research and innovation in Canada, challenges and opportunities. And also Kelly Bronson actually will be on a panel, host a panel on inclusive science policy. What is science and technology and innovation policy, and whose expertise counts in that policy making. So to learn more about these events and when they take place and how you can access them, check out the ISP website and our social media channels for more information. We will then resume our monthly Food for Thought schedule in the new year, and we will look forward to connecting with you again then. For now, a big thank you to everyone again for joining us today, and to our excellent speakers. All the best and goodbye. Thank you.